December 7th, 1941 will forever be known as one of the worst foreign attacks on American soil. Most Americans are aware of this tragedy, but many aren't aware of the preceding events and reasons as to why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor that day. Throughout this presentation, Raven Roberts, Shelby Conard, Michael Huff, and Brandon Davidson will address what circumstances led up to the bombing, what actually happened in the harbor, and how the world was impacted by the horrific actions of this day.
In 1939, Japan was having increasing economic pressure from other countries such as the United States and China. The United States decided to stop its trade with Japan. Then in 1940, when an aviation gasoline ban was imposed on Japan, they decided to attack a Chinese city called Changsha. The war between Japan and China soon came to a halt, but the United States continued to put pressure on Japan by borrowing iron, steel, and mechanical parts. Japan saw the war success of the Germans in Europe as an opportunity for them to put pressure on Europe as well. They received support from the Dutch government in the way of oil supplies, but the Dutch soon decided to cut the Japanese off. After that, Japan decided to threaten Britain and the Dutch, thus causing the United States, the UK, and other Western countries to discontinue Japan's assets. The United States had been a part of negotiations with Japan since very early on to stop the war between China and Japan, but they could not come to an agreement of terms, and other neighboring countries were all readying themselves with protection against Japan in the event of an attack. Japan tried one more time to come to an agreement of terms with the United States on November 20th, 1941. The agreement was telling the United States to stop all of their support in China and put those resources to use in Japan. The United States sent back another proposal on November 26, 1941, requiring Japan to stop all conflicts within China and evacuate, which they declined and declared the United States' request a declaration of war. Japan planned to take control of several European colonies in Asia so they could use the European resources. They also intended to stop the United States from lending any support to their allies. Japan had strategic military actions planned against the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, the United States to further increase their goal of becoming a sovereign empire in Asia. In order to succeed in these attacks, the Japanese decided to take action against the U.S. Pacific Naval Fleet so that they would be unable to interfere, and on December 7, 1941, Japan carried out their plans.
The Japanese attack fleet left its home waters on November 26th, streaming a route towards Pearl Harbor. Fleet Commander Vice Admiral Nagumo received his final orders on December 1st, and on the morning of December 7th, the battle group was in position 275 miles north of Hawaii. At 6 a.m., the first elements of the air attack, consisting of fighter aircraft, torpedo bombers, high-level bombers, and dive bombers, were aloft and assembling in the pre-dawn gloom. The first wave of 183 Japanese planes struck Pearl Harbor at 7:55 a.m., and 170 more Japanese bombers reached the smoke-filled harbor at 8:40 a.m. A total of 2,335 U.S. servicemen were killed, along with 1,143 wounded. All 8 U.S. battleships stationed at Pearl Harbor that day were either sunk or damaged badly. After being torpedoed and repeatedly fired at, the USS Oklahoma turned upside down. The USS Arizona was hit by a 1,700 565-pound bomb which exploded in the ammunition chamber, killing 1,177 crewmen, over half of the total lives lost that day.
By the end of World War II, many countries were suffering in different ways. On September 2, 1945, the Japanese surrendered. Although the fighting was over, Japan still faced problems in their day-to-day life. Japan was weaker than most countries at the war's end. They lost roughly 3 to 4% of their population, which is an estimated 1.7 million. They struggled economically as well as physically. The Allied assault on shipping and bombing campaign destroyed 4/5 of the ships and a quarter of Japan's wealth. They also experienced a material shortage with hyperinflation that lasted 4 years. 66 of Japan's major cities were heavily bombed, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Due to these bombs, 40% of their urban areas were destroyed, which led to roughly 30% of their population homeless. Many Japanese people would live in abandoned buses due to the shortage of housing. Along with homelessness, many Japanese children became orphans due to the effects of the war. Another struggle of post-war Japan was the shortage of food. Officials in Osaka estimate that approximately 46% of all economic crime involved food around 1944. With Japanese people facing these hard times, it caused a rise in drug abuse and alcoholism. By September of 1945, General Douglas MacArthur helped to rebuild Japan through the Supreme Command of Allied Powers. This occupation divided into 3 phases: the initial effort to punish and reform Japan, the work to revive the Japanese economically, and finally the conclusion of a formal peace treaty and alliance. Eventually, by the early 1950s, Japan was able to regain its power and grow in its economy.